The former FBI Assistant Director for Intelligence, Kevin Braca. Kevin, the president is, again, quick to point out, and indeed Rod Rosenstein was when this was all announced last week, that it didn't alter the outcome of the election, but they didn't go so far as to say the collusion issue was fully resolved or not. I think Chris Christie had interpreted this as no collusion to this point. Regardless of who's right or wrong on this, are we missing the bigger picture here? What's your sense of what these indictments mean and where this investigation could be going?
Yeah, I think we are looking at missing the larger picture here. These indictments weren't meant to establish whether or not there was any coordination between the Trump campaign and the Russians. This indictment simply grew out of a counterintelligence investigation started by the FBI a couple of years prior. This was the investigation largely that James Comey was referring to in his testimony before Congress March 20th, 2017, and which triggered the Deputy Attorney General to create a special counsel and instruct Robert Mueller to then subsume that investigation and take it through its natural paces. There's two parts of that. First of all, Mueller is required to look at what is the extent of Russian government interference in the presidential campaign, and then secondarily, were there any, quote, links or coordination between the Trump campaign and the Russian government. This indictment doesn't serve to answer those questions. It simply serves to demonstrate that there were Russians acting inside the United States and in Russia to attempt to influence, or, in the words of the indictment, sow discord inside the presidential campaign.
And that's what worries me the most, Kevin. I mean, as you pointed out, I mean, regardless of your views on whether this was fair or not to Donald Trump, and whether there was collusion or not, or that it altered the election results, which appears certainly not to be the case, you would think, as president, he'd be very, very concerned, since he is now president, since he is the establishment guy, that all of this could happen again. In fact, most security experts have said the Russians are already working on making it happen again in the next election and the next election after that. Yet there was no eagerness, or at least any statements, unless I miss one, at least from the president, to follow up on that, to do that. He now acknowledges the Russians were in fact doing this, something he prior called a hoax. So what do you want to hear out of him now regarding 2018, 2020, and they're not doing it again?
Well, there's 2 points there in what you just said. First of all, if this had remained an FBI investigation, these indictments would have been sealed in the hopes that the Russians would return for the next cycle, where they could be arrested, imprisoned, intelligence could be gathered from them, a deterrence message would be sent. That is not going to occur now. Now, in fairness to the special counsel, there's tremendous political pressure and interest surrounding this issue, and the judgment call was made that the higher value was to announce the fact that these indictments were made. So the president is looking at the fact that the Russian government undeniably has launched a type of influence activity inside the United States that is frankly in its infancy. What alarms me the most about what they were doing is not the fact that what they were doing could influence the election, but what they were doing, they were leveraging the internet and social media platforms in a way that in the future will only get stronger. They will be able to do the exact same activity without having to come to the United States, and they'll do it to greater extent. That's the sowing discord part. Right. That's the part where we get to where we can't trust information that we're receiving. And
by the way, sowing discord even after the election. Well, the most eye-opening developments in this indictment, to me at least, Kevin, and you're the expert here, is all the discord they were sowing after the election, ginning up rallies, you know, to get Hillary Clinton protesters going, simultaneously to get Trump protesters going. To what end?
It's an assault on truth. Fundamentally, it's an assault on truth.
Well put.
And trust. And this is something that we're going to have to educate the American people about. And with the help, frankly, of the social media platforms up there that are out and about and need to step up and take responsibility for leveraging technology to help understand the source of some of this information, so that judgments couldn't be made.
Kevin Brock, well put. Thank you very, very much. The former FBI Assistant Director of Intelligence.